as mentioned in the last video, I broke this down into two parts just because it's a lengthy first video with the modifications I had to make to the bracketry and whatnot to make everything fit. And the other modifications I've got to do to make this kit fit in this truck because it's not a ready-made kit for this vehicle. Again, I can't say enough about Old Air products. Their customer service was the thing that made me purchase from them. Great customer service, which is something that's kind of rare in today's world anymore. The timeline to get my product here, 4 days from the time I ordered it. Other companies were telling me weeks and weeks and weeks. So kudos to Old Air products. I'll definitely be using them on future projects that require an HC installation. So what we're going to cover in this video, we've got vents to cut in the dash. We've got a defroster duct here to modify and accept the plate that goes on for that. We've got wiring to run. We've got lines to, well, we've got the lines installed. Everything from the firewall forward is finished and tightened up. So once we get all the duct work in, we can go ahead and run our heater hoses also, and we can get the system vacuumed down and charge it with some Freon and make sure that everything's working the way it should be. So follow along as I go through and figure out what I've got to do to modify what comes in this kit to work in this truck with what we have to do yet with all the duct work and our defroster ducts, and we'll get all this stuff finished up and get it working. Okay, so we're going to go ahead today, or this morning, and get this defroster duct modified. This is the stock defroster duct work that goes in the truck. This company tends to use, looks like they use mostly your original defroster ducting in their kits, which is fine because these were designed to clear the windshield in a way that is efficient. So they have the duct openings where they need to be. Now the 79 in back defroster duct is different than this one, of course. And this is the plate. This is an adapter plate that comes in the kit. It would attach to the bottom of the 79 defroster duct, and it has an inlet for flexible hose. So obviously it doesn't quite fit this one. It's the same, it's bigger than the opening. It's actually wider, but it has open ends. So this would not work if we just attached it to here like this, made some L brackets and attached it to the bottom of it. Mainly because your air is going to blow out the sides instead of going up through the defroster. So we're going to make an adapter, probably out of some aluminum sheeting, that will allow me to attach this on here and then connect up my flexible hoses, which will go to this Y piece, and then these two, this will go to this adapter, and these two will proceed on to the evaporator box and connect to two outlets on the evaporator box and send the air to the defroster ducts when needed. So that's what we're going to accomplish this morning with this, and then we're going to move on to the next phase of whatever I gotta modify to install this kit in the truck. Okay, so I decided after looking at this, again, plate's got to go on here like this. I think if I just cut these ears off of here so that this is the same all the way around, then this plate will sit down here. I can move it forward enough here so it'll make contact on this lip here, and then I'll make a couple of L brackets to put on each side here that will attach to the flanges on here, and put a piece in here to cover this part of the opening so that this side will seal. So it'll sit like this. So you can see I'll have a bracket here, and then I can pop rivet this along here. I'll put a piece in here so that this will cover this hole and seal everything. That'll leave this thing totally sealed up and attached to this. Okay, I've got my pieces all made up to adapt my plate for my defroster duct work. As you can see, now the entire hole is covered. And there'll be no air leakage. I've got one small spot right there, but I can put in some foam or some sealant there to help keep the air from coming out of there, so it all gets directed through the top here. I just made up a plate here that extended this out, and then two kind of L brackets. This one's at a 90, this one at about a 45 degree, and just pop riveted everything on here. And I'll use the seal across here on the front part of this, and as you can see, again, covers up the hole nice, and then we'll have good airflow to the defroster ducts. The next thing I'm going to work on here is getting my vents installed in the dash, and I have these larger rectangular vents. They swivel back and forth, and the centers move up and down so you can adjust the airflow. And I'm going to use these in the dash. They'll go in where this template, they have this template. These were vents that were sent with the kit. I requested 2 rectangular vents and 2 square vents. These are the square vents, and I was going to put these here, but they're a little small in my opinion. And I was going to use the rectangular vents on the passenger side of the dash installed like this above the glove box, but they're large enough to the point where I didn't like how they were going to sit in the dash as it is, and I'll show you that when I get to that point. So I've got some other vents to use. So I decided I'm going to put these over here, so this will give the driver really good airflow. So I got this template to use with those vents, so you can mark your hole, and it fits here pretty good. I had to, on this corner here, just adjust it a little bit so I could get it to set in up against the edge of this opening for the dash gauge cluster, and it sits up against the bottom part, or this is the top, but in here it's the bottom. So I'll mark out my square or my rectangular here and cut this out, and then I want to move it to this side, but in order to have it sit this way over here so that my offset from the gauge cluster is the same on both sides, I have to make more adjustments to that corner of this template so that it'll slide down. Now if I do it this way, I mean, I could modify this side of the template so that it can be used on both sides. I may just do that. But here, this is how I want it to fit in. I want it to fit against the gauge cluster opening the same width on both sides, so that the vents will look the same, and have this set down against the top so that they'll be down the same distance from the top. And then I can cut my holes and install my vents, and that part of this installation will be completed. Alright, I got the left side vent installed. I changed the positioning of it a little bit because I had noticed that the overall height of this vent was almost exactly the same as this opening for the gauge cluster. So I thought it would look a little bit more symmetric, I guess you could say, if the trim, as you can see, this is trimmed out about the same, lined up with the trim that goes along the gauge cluster opening. So I shifted up the, as you can see on this side, I shifted my template up closer to the top. So we got that one put in, and I got to work on this right side one, and then I'll show you everything once it's finished up. Alright, vent number 2 went a little quicker than vent number 1. But I think they came out really nice. Looks like they should have been there from the get-go. So this leaves the driver's side vents installed. I got to work on the passenger side ones, which will go in right above the glove box. And I got a few other things to modify on this dash. I got to do the defroster duct yet, and get that set up so I can connect up the tubes. So once we've got all this done, we'll go ahead with everything else and start getting our tubing run. So next up on the AC installations, I want to get the passenger side vents cut into the dash. And I talked a little bit before about the vents that I was going to use. Now the vents that I put in the gauge cluster were actually supposed to be for the passenger side of the dash. But when I set them here, they laid down, they fit in this area here, but they set down too far, and I would have had to cut out this whole piece in order to get it to fit in between this other raised section, which would have made it difficult for the vent to fit right in here because of the curvature and the way that this sticks up. So I looked in my stash of parts, and I had these smaller vents from another company left over from a job that I didn't use them on. So these will fit in between this raised section and allow the vent to sit down flush on here and clip in and hold properly. So I decided I'm going to go with these vents, and I use the other two on the driver's side of the dash. So what I got to do is I need to make a template the size of the back size of this, so that when I cut the hole, it'll have this section here will set down and keep it from going through the dash. So make the hole too big, the vent's just going to go right through the dash. So it's got to be sized to here so that this lip will sit down and catch on the vent here. So I'm going to make up some templates, and then I'm going to measure them out side to side, same distance from the end of this panel, and get my holes cut, get these set in, or make sure they fit. I'm not going to set them in yet because I do need to take this dash and do a color change on it to match all the other interior parts. So let me get my templates made, and I'll bring you back when I'm going to cut the holes. Alright, so I've got my vent laid out here on this side of the dash. Basically what I'm doing, I'm taking a measurement from the upper edge of this raised section here, a certain distance in that I want the vent to sit, and I'm going to duplicate it on this side, come in the same amount, and then center it top to bottom. And then I've got a little template made that I'll lay up against this edge, and I'll center it this way and then trace out around it. So on this side, I've come in to my 8 mark on my scale here. So I'm just going to find my upper edge here, and this is no way exact measurements are very precise, but it'll look close enough. So I come into my 8 mark, and I just put a little mark there, and I'll come down here and come into 8 and put my mark there, and then I'm going to draw a line from top to bottom connecting these marks. Now I take my template and I'll set it on here right up against that line and try and center this as best I can. It's a little hard to find the edge on these upper sections. It's not as pronounced, but I think, well, let me see here. It's 2. Okay, this side gets bigger. So this side is 2 inches, and this side is about 2 1/4 inches. So we need to center that up still. So let's see. We come to 8, which is a 1/2 inch. See, that's too much. But just a tad, about 8. About 8. That's about center right there. I'm going to check this in. Just making sure we're approximately the same distance, and that looks good right there. So now I'm just going to trace this template. It's hard to see with my hand in the way. I'm left-handed, so I'll try and do this right-handed. If you ever wondered what was wrong with me all this time, I'm left-handed, so that tells you a lot. Okay, so that leaves our marking there for where we need to cut this out. And when you stand back and look at this, it almost looks like it's crooked because this gets wider. From this end to this end, it gets a little wider. So you just have to rely on your measurements, making sure that they're the same from here to here and here to here on each end. That'll leave it centered on each side so that you know it's going to be square when it's sitting in the dash. You really don't want it in there crooked, because when everybody's going to look at it, it's going to be crooked one way or the other. So what I'll do is I'll take a drill bit, drill out each corner on these, and then I'll take my cutoff wheel and I'll cut out my lines, and this is going to get us close. This is by no way, again, this is not a precise measurement opening, but it's going to get us real close. It should allow this to slip in, and then I can fine-tune this opening with a file and get it so that this vent will slip down inside. Okay, so I've got this side worked out, so I'm going to run you through the procedure to do how to cut your hole in. And like I said, I'm going to take my drill, I'm going to drill out my 4 corners, and then I'll cut out the center. Now what I'll do is check my fit, and it still needs a little taken off, as I found on the other side. So we're going to just trace out our opening. Let's see if I can get this. This center section here is just a little little big. Just trace this. And it's really not too far off. And I'll just trim most of it out again with the cutoff wheel. Check my fit again. Alright, we're really close. So now, just to do some fine tuning on this, I'll just use a file and see where it needs to be opened up at. Oh, here's a little tight. And just clean up my edges. And also need to back file the thickness here so that these little tangs will pop out and hold this vent in the dash once it's installed. Still tight. Alright, so there we have it. And that's how we cut our holes in for our dash vents. And you can see this swivel and it moves. You can move the vents whichever way you need the air to blow. So that leaves these holes cut, and now I can go ahead and get my dash recolored so it's going to match the rest of my interior. Okay, I am today working on the control head for this air conditioning system, and I wanted to get this done mainly because I got in a different part for this that would make the stock controls work the new air conditioning, but I really like the sleeker look on this new control panel and I would like to use this. But as you can see here on the original heater controls, there's a slot here where this switch would go, and this is for the fuel tanks. It switches between the front and the rear tank to draw the fuel from. So this does not have a provision for that, but the more I got looking at it, I thought, well, I mean, I can add it. It wouldn't be a big problem to, you know, I just need to measure off and put a slot in here, and then make a new bracket to hold my switch onto the back side here. See, this switch here is held with just a Z bracket, and it's attached to the two mounting studs here and here, and I could technically just do the same thing on this side. So I've already measured and marked. Probably hard to see. You can see the Sharpie marks I've got here. This is where I'm going to put my slot at, and then I'm going to make a bracket to come off of here and position the switch, and then it'll sit on here. Sit on this switch here. This is metal, so I can tack it onto here, which will hold it in place, and then that'll put the switch back in here just like it was on this factory panel, and it'll have a nice fresh clean look for the heater controls. So I've got everything marked out. I've taken some measurements. I've got a piece of metal here that I'm going to use to make my bracket with. And I'm going to go ahead and get that cut and bent, and then get my slot drilled and cut into this piece and start fitting everything together. Okay, I've got all my pieces made and my holes and slots cut, and I've mocked everything up and it all fits real nice. So I just wanted to show you what I did before I weld this to the switch here. Here's my bracket that I made, just a simple Z bracket. I got my 2 holes here to mount to my control head, and as you can see I put a slot in the control head, and that's what it looks from the front side, and that's where the switch will come through. So the bracket just will slip onto the 2 mounting studs here, and as you can see it lines up there with the slot. So what I got to do with this switch is this bracket will sit on here like this, and I'll just put a few tack welds on it. That'll hold everything together to the metal plate that's on here, and then I can go ahead and bolt that in with the 2 nuts that held the bracket together previously. Put my little switch knob back on. I'll probably clean this up and just give it a little squirt of black to make it look nice again, and that'll leave my switch installed in my control head just like the factory. Okay, so I got my bracket attached to my switch, and you might be wondering, well, what about the heat transfer into the switch? Is it not going to melt the plastics that it's made with? That was a concern of mine. So what I would do is I would put a tack, and then in my other hand I was holding my my air nozzle, and as soon as I let up from putting the tack on, I would start to blow it with cool air that would immediately cool the welded area down, and it kept the heat down to an absolute minimum. So that should not have damaged the switch in any way as far as the plastic pieces of it go. Well, here is the end result with our switch installed. As you can see, that would be for the front tank, that would be for the rear tank. So it looks like a pretty good fit. Bracket's all attached. The switch is good and sturdy on the back side there, and it fits in the dash perfectly. So that's how it'll look when it's installed. Looks just like it came out of the factory that way. So we're going to continue on with some of the other modifications I've got to do on this kit, and I'll bring you back when I get started on those. Okay, my dash dried. I've got everything set back in, and I've got my wiring mostly run and my duct work to my vents run. As you can see here, I do need to work on the openings for these just a little bit, as the bottoms, the clips don't want to grab. So I need to I just need to make some fine tuning on the opening where the little tabs are, so that they'll grab and not want to push out. And right now I've been working on getting my heater controls set in. I've had them set in there once with the trim plate. This is the trim plate that goes on here. I need to just adjust that some to get it to set in there the right way. And that's where we're at with the AC installation. The dash looks really good in here. Looks pretty much like factory would have put AC in this truck.